Hey guys, it's Ollie from Rad Season. Welcome to the Rad Season show. I'm super excited to be joined today by award-winning photographer, adventurer, explorer, the man himself, Chris Burkard. Chris, how are you, dude?
Thanks for having me, Ollie. It means a lot. I'm super grateful to be here and catch up on this beautiful Wednesday morning. It's awesome.
Nice. And you've just come back from Iceland, right? How was that?
I was there. I did a shoot for Black Diamond. We did like a hiking, trekking campaign for them. Mm-hmm. And then I also shot a little mini series, kind of like a video mini series for Sony while I was out there. It was a bit of like a visual podcast, kind of just like me getting to know somebody and then taking them through a bit of a kind of a day in the life experience in a place that I love or am inspired by. So It was rad. It was a full value trip. Definitely. We had like 15 days of shooting and we shot almost every single day. So I was pretty burnt by the end. And then my family came to join me and it was rad. I just got back maybe a week and a half ago and then I went to Aspen and went skiing last weekend. So
cool, man. And what's been the fascination with Iceland? Because you've been there quite a few times. Was that sort of like projects kind of taking you there, or were you like I want to kind of discover it a bit more?
I don't even know if it's so much a fascination as it is just like I sort of fell in love with the place years ago, and I wanted to kind of create more of a life for myself there because I enjoy the environment, I enjoy the landscape, and I wanted my kids to be able to like experience a place growing up where it felt much different than home. You know, I'm from California. There's not many seasons. And it felt very much like the people kind of keep you coming back, you know, like I think that you fall in love with the location, but then it's usually the people and the initiatives and things like that get you excited. So I now kind of have a little apartment over there and a little office and stuff like that.
Oh, okay, no way.
So it's kind of something that's become a little more permanent, and I try to go every couple months, and I try to spend a couple months a year there actually. So that's my dream.
And is it always around the same time of year, or do you kind of go at different times?
It varies. You know, I'm not really going over there for vacation much. I try to go over there for work. So I typically like to go sometime in the summer. Fall is my favorite season, but the winter is rad too. You know, and you just have to embrace all the seasons. I think if anything, it's just like when life calls for a little bit of a change, it's good to mix it up. And I usually try to figure if I can get over there for work, I can spend a couple extra days hanging with friends or going and doing some bike ride or something like that. You know, just something to experience a little more of the place.
Nice. Yeah. And I mean, with the like Iceland and these type of locations, and when did the traveling start for you? Was that sort of something that you did before photography, or
no? I mean, I didn't I didn't have a passport until I started working as a photographer, and that was right around when I was like 20 years old. I got into photography right around 19, and I pretty much, poured everything into it. And I didn't actually travel outside of the US. I'd only gone to like Mexico. So outside of like the continental US until I was, again, like 21. And the first trip I ever did was like Dubai and Yemen and Oman, and then Indonesia, and then Australia, and et cetera, et cetera. So it kind of evolved fairly rapidly. But no, I mean, it's funny because I there was never an opportunity to travel. I grew up in a really low income home, and there wasn't the ability to leave the country. So for me, in the beginning of my like early life, I guess you could say, like the furthest extent of what I knew was out there was like national parks and Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and Montana, and places like that, because those were places we could drive to as a family growing up.
And it's a pretty diverse place there. So you can kind of, you can travel across the country and you can see all the different seasons and everything from mountains to the desert. So I mean, was the surfing, like when you were growing up, was that kind of a bit of a draw to take you?
It's funny because it's kind of like, it's not really something where it's a different sensation or a different idea than like maybe you growing up, in a landlocked state, and you're like, oh, I just want to move to the beach. I love, California surf culture or whatever it is. For me, it was more like I grew up by the ocean. I grew up maybe like a couple miles from the ocean. So really, from the beginning, that was just like something that I had access to. Something that was kind of always there. And in many ways, it was almost like a babysitter, because, I would get dropped off at the beach and go hang out. So growing up, surfing was a big part of my life, but it was similar to like if you grew up in a mountain town, you just go skiing at a young age. You get used to that. So
because everyone around you is doing it, right? I mean, like
exactly, yeah. So I grew up just being in the ocean, boogie boarding, and then body surfing and surfing, and kind of just it translated to like wanting to understand the ocean and be a part of it.
Yeah. And then like when did the sort of the idea or the feeling for like documenting what was going on with your mates surfing and kind of picking up a camera, like when did that start?
It was a natural extension of just being in high school, and my friends would be going up the coast and exploring like more remote, off the beaten path waves and colder environments, and stuff that wasn't just like my local break. And so I would be with them. And I think eventually I just kind of found my way into being like, well, I want to kind of be like the documentarian. I want to like document these journeys. These are fun experiences. And I guess you could say that growing up, without a complete family, like I didn't have a dad in my life until I was, my stepdad came in when I was like 13, 14. So I kind of looked for like that band of brothers, like sort of that gang mentality, I guess you could say, where you feel a sense of like belonging, because I was a single kid, I was, single child, and didn't have, I think a brother or a complete family. So that was like, I found kind of some importance in my life there, being like, well, I'm going to go hang with my friends and go surfing and run up the coast and have these kind of adventures, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And so it was a natural progression, but behind just wanting to kind of document it. But even in the beginning, it wasn't like, oh, I'm documenting this in the hopes of this being a career at all. It was just for fun. It was just more casual.
Okay. And then when the internship came on, like I'm kind of curious about that. I did something. I interned for the Surfer's Path magazine over in London, not within the creative side, but on the sort of business development side of things. And that then sort of opened up into working on the magazines. And how did that all start? Like, was that something that you just kind of, like you just called up Transworld and tried to
it's basically, it's just like it's a hard thing to kind of explain, like my entire origin story. And so, we're kind of talking about it in bits and pieces here, but ultimately I made a relationship with one of the photo editors, Pete Terrace.
Okay.
And I was submitting images, and this was like years later. And I had kind of developed like a bit of like a working relationship, right? So he knew that I was up there shooting, and I was interested in trying to pursue this craft. And I think he saw some promise, and he really gave me a great opportunity to like try and go and do something bigger than I guess what I thought was possible. And so I kind of asked him if there was an opportunity to do an internship, and he said yes. And so it was wild, because I would basically like leave, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the geography of California, but I would leave my house in Central California, drive like 5.5 hours down to Oceanside every Monday morning at 3 a.m., be there for work, sleep in my truck all week at like the park. And this wasn't like van life days. This wasn't like, it was like sleep in a beach parking lot, and like, take showers at the beach shower, and then
when it wasn't trendy, right? This is just
it was like I was in the back of my Toyota Tacoma. I had no bed. I just had like a sleeping pad. It sucked. I mean, it was and I'd be at work all week, kind of gross. And I would just try to absorb as much as I possibly could. And that experience was really was monumental, mainly, and I'm sure you can relate, but learning about the editorial side of things, learning how the magazine worked, learning how magazines operate. And, as a kid who just had no experience in that field, and I didn't go to college, didn't go to school, I didn't, learn photojournalism or anything like that. This was like a real education. And it was something that kind of, it was something that really taught me a ton. And I think that I value that experience as one of my most profitable, I guess you could say, those 4 months I spent.
And then that sort of, well, obviously the rest is history. It kind of led on to then working with the other magazines and with Surfline. And I mean, were you sort of doing things sort of outside the industry as well? Were you kind of just like whatever work at the beginning? Were you just trying to absorb everything and learn as much as you could, and sort of doing, different opportunities when you could get them?
Absolutely. I think that the reality is like, who out there ever just like says, I want to shoot this, and then all of a sudden opportunities come. It doesn't happen like that. Like work doesn't just gravitate towards you because you have a desire. You have to actually put in the effort. So I was shooting everything that I could. In the beginning, I literally was taking pictures of anything, senior photos and weddings and whatnot. I'd roll into some random surf shop and I'd be like, hey, I'll shoot the interior photos of your shop for your website. I needed to make a living, right? Yeah. And when I lived in my vehicle, it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't great, mainly because I was living below poverty level and I was just kind of like surviving. But I was always willing to like be the one who woke up at the beach parking lot when the waves were good. And there was a level of commitment to the craft that I really tried to kind of almost wear as like a badge of honor. Like I didn't think, and I still don't think, that I'm like the most technically savvy photographer. I think that there's a lot of people out there who are more technically sound than me, but I think it was, if I had one skill set that was more, that was the most valuable, it was the fact that I was so stubborn. Like I was the one who was willing to like stay out till everybody went home, or like till the sun went down, or I'd be there more early. I just put in more work, more effort. That's all there really was to it. And it's funny because that paid off. And nowadays I'm learning to work smarter and not harder. But in the beginning, I didn't have the skill, I think, to like feel confident just being like, oh, I'm going to show up and I'm going to get, I just had to be there. So, I think that an element of hard work has always been ingrained into my philosophy as a creative in some way.
And was there any sort of anyone or things kind of like people helping you out and mentoring you around that time? Or were you just like, I'm just going to put in the hours and I'm going to,
Yeah, Pete Terrace, the photo editor who really helped me out. He was a mentor of sorts, but it was hard because it's like he was also mentoring like 100 other people at the time. So it was challenging to feel like you really got his full attention. It wasn't like he would give me the tips and tricks that I needed, but it was a lot of it was like, you need to figure this out on your own. Kind of like, I guess if anything, I sought out mentors, and I had a couple people help me along the way, David Pooh and some other people who like, I guess, took me slightly under their wing or gave me some advice, but there was never anybody that I would like train under. That being said, this was really the age when I came up, was really the age of creativity. And the internet was sort of like flourishing in some way. So I used everything at my disposal, every opportunity to like research something or learn that I could find online. I would do so. And I would rely upon that as a resource, as a tool to kind of figure out what the heck was going on. And that became really valuable to me. And it still is, like, I feel like the first place I gravitate towards is trying to teach myself something. Because when there isn't a ton of mentors, a ton of opportunities, you have to learn some way. Right. Yeah. So I would kind of lean towards that.
And like, would that be the case of then sort of like looking at different technology and I guess that whole process of like when it went from print to digital and kind of looking at all these innovations, right?
There wasn't like, there wasn't somebody who was like, hey, you're shooting film, now you're going to shoot digital. Here's how you do it. You have to go out, and it's a lot of trial and error. And I think, having shot film the first couple of years of my career and then eventually migrating over to digital, I was really like at the, that was like the forefront of what was happening when I started. So I tried to make that shift early. And I think if anything, it teaches you to be resilient. It teaches you to kind of like figure things out on your own and not have to like nowadays I meet photographers and creatives who are kind of looking for everything to be like laid out for them in some way. And it's not frustrating. I just feel like sometimes I want to shake them and be like, hey, like nobody's here to teach you this. Like nobody's going to hold your hand. Like you have to actually go and put in the work to create the portfolios that you want to put in the world, out in the world. Cause that's what I did. And everybody I know who's been successful, that's really how they invested their time. right? Is like they would go out and just work without the expectation that it was always going to translate to money, but the hope that it was going to benefit their career in the long term.
And do you reckon that's sort of maybe down to passion?
I think
in a sense, or I don't know.
I think that passion always has to play a role, right? I mean, passion is a big, huge part of why we do what we do. It's to me, it's like passion is more of like the fuel that gets you out the door in the morning. And then I think that creativity and hard work is sort of what sustains you, right? And so passion is sort of like the caffeine. It's like what wakes you up. It's what motivates you when you're in a freezing cold tent and you have to get out at night, shoot the northern lights or whatever it is. But I think that at a certain point, passion is not enough. Like you need more than that. You need to hone a skill and get it, have one of the knives in your quiver become really sharp, become really, you got to become really experienced with it. So this is kind of why, for me, I've always, explained to photographers that it's important for them to really hone their skill to become like the best at something. Like I feel like it's critical to not just try to convince the world that you can do everything well, but rather, know and train yourself to become really, really good at one thing, and then everything else will hopefully follow, right? Like you need to become a specialist. Mm-hmm. And I think that by becoming a specialist, you actually make yourself more valuable to your clients. People are often sought out, photographers are sought out because they are specialists at something. And I think for me, that was a huge part of my career path, was like becoming really good at one particular skill set and then trying to explore others.
And were you like looking at writing, and were you writing and were you documenting stuff? And like before you sort of kind of started doing speaking engagements, before motion graphics and filming and directing, were you just sort of then focused on becoming, I guess, a specialist within that particular style of photography?
Absolutely. First? I think that my desire was, I looked at the magazine. My dream, my goal was to work for surf magazines, right? Like Surfer magazine. And I looked at all the people on staff and I'm like, well, this person does this and this person does this. And all the photographers, they have this role they fill. And I'm like, well, I don't want to be that guy. I want to be the guy who goes to the more remote, cold weather destinations, tells a more complete story. It means I'm not going to have like the random image in the magazine every month, but it means I'm going to have the big feature story. And that's exactly what happened. Like I would come back from a trip in a remote place and, share these photos from the edge of the world. And I became more of like a documentarian, more of a photojournalist, I guess you could say, in that regard, as opposed to like following a select group of athletes or following a tour or something along those lines. So for me, that was kind of like where my skill set really became valuable. And it's kind of, I think it's the same way I apply today. Like I still try to tell stories if I can, and still try to like keep my work kind of involved in like that deeper storytelling narrative, I guess you could say.
Yeah. And would you say like taking Iceland, for example, and talking about the people there and having that connection, when you first started doing these trips, was it about that human element back then? Or were you like, okay, I just want to sort of,
human element, you meaning, what do you mean? Sorry.
Meaning sort of like within the storytelling, it's about that human aspect. It's not just about going there and shooting action shots of, people surfing.
I think that by the nature of documenting surfing in general, there's always an athlete, there's always a person experiencing it. So the human element is always present. Yet for me, it's interesting because my style of work, I to be honest, originally I wanted to be a landscape photographer, but I realized early on that wasn't going to be a realistic opportunity, because it just, what was required to do that wasn't possible. I didn't have a gallery. I didn't have the equipment. I didn't have the time to go out and shoot these beautiful landscapes. So therefore, I needed to be more focused on what was possible. Surfing was a potentially, even though there's probably less surf photographers who got paid for a living than landscape photographers, it just was something that I knew. And I've always said that like you're more likely to find success, working in the field that than trying to do something else. So that being said, when I approached kind of surf photography and shooting subjects, like I always thought like, well, the landscape is the most important thing. And so I applied that to my images. I applied that to the work that I put in. I wanted to kind of pull back and show these beautiful arenas that people would find themselves. I mean, this to me is what empowers my mission statement, that I want to like explore man's relationship, human's relationship, man or woman, to nature and the world around them. And I did that for many years through surfing. And I've done that through a lot of different things. Nowadays, the storytelling is a lot more deep and the narratives are more personal and intimate, but it's always kind of been focused around that thought process.
Okay. And when did the whole sort of film element come into play? Like,
yeah, you know, it's interesting there because like cinematography, it was a natural progression. Like we were going on trips, I was taking photographs. I love the collaboration. I love working with a writer. I'm not much of a writer myself. I don't see the experience in terms of like the written word. I wanted to like work with somebody, collaborate with somebody. So I would go and shoot for the photographs, but then I'd be like, oh, well, I want a writer to come on board. So I'd be working with them. And then all of a sudden I'm like, well, this is an incredible trip. There's so many beautiful visuals. We should make a film out of this, or we should have a visual component to this. And so I'd work with the cinematographer, and all of a sudden it was kind of this thing where I'm like, well, I kind of had the vision. I planned the trip. I produced the trip. I put things together. So it made sense if I kind of had the story in my head that I would be sort of working on the directing side of things. So I would help work with the cinematographer to obviously direct a project in some way. And that just evolved into actually directing real, you know, commercial spots and films and things of that nature. But it really started as like, we'd go on surf trips, you know, to somewhere like the Aleutian Islands. And I'm like, we are selling ourselves short if we don't come back with some visuals that really illustrate how amazing this was. Because photography, as great of a tool as it is, it only goes so far, you know, and it only really kind of translates the experience so much. You actually become kind of limited into how you can share it and what you can allow people to kind of experience if you're just showing photographs, right?
Yeah. And would you say you were enjoying it more, like as much, if not more, because it was maybe something new at times and sort of,
I think it was like, you know, it's like a new voice you find. You know, I think over the years, one thing I've realized is that to share my experience of the world just through photography can feel really limited, right? But then all of a sudden you start, you know, vocalizing your experience, you start writing it down, you start having this kind of all these modalities of how you can share your experience, and all of a sudden you become more well-rounded. You feel more heard, you feel more seen, and I think that's really valuable in some ways. Like is like becoming more I guess people are more cognizant to what you're experiencing because you're reaching more people. So that's really important. It's really valuable to me.
And would you say that would be the same with then collaborating, like when you were doing books and sort of
I mean, I still work on books. I still make books. I have one coming out now, and I mean, to be honest, sometimes they require me to kind of write a lot of my own thoughts, but my favorite ones are when I get to collaborate with either an artist or a journalist or a writer. One of my favorite books to date was At Glacier's End. It's a book that's about Iceland's glacial river system and advocating for kind of the protection of them. And I worked with an amazing, talented writer, Matt McDonald, who helped write like 10,000 words to create this beautiful narrative around it. Nice. And so to me, it's like, I want to appreciate people in their creativity, right? And I think that's the whole idea behind collaborating, right? Is if you can find somebody who can actually make your work more valuable in a way. That's how collaborations can work, right? You both bring something to the table and you both benefit from each other's support.
Exactly, with like different skill sets, and then kind of putting that forward. And with all that going on and with so much work and like getting approached the whole time, I mean, how do you then balance I guess everything from family? I mean, you've got kids, and you know, at the beginning when you were saying you were just working the whole time, were other things, were they just getting pushed aside? Or
it's hard. You know, I think that balance is a funny thing. I don't think there's any such thing as balance, because life oftentimes will throw you into a state of in unbalance, right? Like if you
Yeah.
take on a big job, there's no way to be like, well, I'm going to balance family time and work and this and that. Like you're committed to working on a big assignment for 30 days internationally. Like that's not going to find, you're not going to find balance. So I think it's about finding rhythm. And what rhythm does is rhythm oscillates between like tiny variations to big variations. And I think the key thing is that you achieve a state of rhythm by accepting and understanding, well, if I agree to this, if I agree to making this film, I know that my next 2 years is really going to be tied up in committing to this film. So when I'm on the road, I need to give that 100%. When I'm home, I need to give my family as much of my attention as I can. So I think for me, it's I've learned to try to balance my time. You know, be more fierce about protecting my time with my family and the time I have for myself. Because again, I think that's the hardest thing is when you start your career, everybody's so eager to work and all of a sudden you're saying yes to everything. It's so easy to do. And then at a certain point, you're like, well, every time I say yes, I'm actually saying no to what I want to do or something for me or my mental health or my physical health or whatever. And so I think that at a certain point, you become more balanced, I guess you could say, or you find a rhythm where you're like, hey, right now is a season where I need to work a lot. And then right now is a season where I don't need to work a lot. So it's about forecasting and it's about seeing these opportunities as they come. Also like taking a step back and realizing what are you saying yes to and how is that going to affect you emotionally, physically, spiritually, right? And I think that's been really the biggest eye opener for me is that by saying no to something, I'm actually saying yes to what I want, right? So that's been really huge. And I think my family's benefited from it. And, you know, right now, I've been trying to take them on the road with me. They just came with me to Iceland the last 2 trips. That's been awesome. It's not always like fun having your family on a job with you because it's hard to really like focus in. But
was that the first time they'd been over there with you?
Well, they went twice. My wife's been over like 7 times. My kids twice. So that's been rad for them. And you know, I hope that they have more experiences like that. And yeah, it's awesome.
Cool. And how would you say your perspectives changed with everything that's been going on with the pandemic and, you know?
Yeah, I think if anything, I made a film. Let's be transparent. Like I still was traveling during the pandemic a bit. I got a special exemption permit to go to Iceland twice, one in 2022 one in 2020 and one in 2021. And I was in Japan right before the pandemic started, right before the travel ban hit. I went to, you know, whatever. I was able to work a little bit. My travel was probably cut down like 90% of what I would normally do. I worked a lot in the US. I worked a lot locally, went to Alaska. But point being is I made a film at one point during the pandemic. It was about cycling through Iceland, east to west. And the funny thing is like we planned for a year. And then all of a sudden the travel ban hit and it was like all the planning was done. We're not going. And it was so challenging, you know, because obviously like we had put so much effort and time and energy and money and invested into this trip and then it wasn't going to happen. And then all of a sudden we got this exemption permit. We went. And I think the funny thing is there was a moment where I'm like, am I really prepared for this? And I kind of realized that like, if the pandemic has taught me anything, it's that you can never guarantee when an opportunity will come or when it will not be there. So you have to take advantage of the opportunities, the ones that really inspire you, the ones that really move you, not just the ones you're doing for work or for money or for fame or whatever. It's like, you have to really, you know, if there's something you feel inspired, feel motivated, it keeps you up at night, you need to take advantage of the opportunity to do it as soon as you can. And
was that sort of like a gut feeling then, or you were like,
yeah, it was a gut feeling. And it was also kind of like, a little bit of like a, wow, like this is a cool opportunity. This is a cool moment. Like I didn't think it was going to happen. And then it did. So, super exciting. And if anything, and just like a real eye opener to kind of see something like that come to fruition. And I honestly was like, I wrote it off. I'm like, we're not going. Like it's not going to happen.
And how long did you stay over there for when you were doing that?
Well, I did, again, I did 2 different trips to Iceland during the pandemic, one in 2020, one in 2021. Both trips were like a month long.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. And I mean, with these projects, I mean, the question you must get asked the whole time is like, okay, well, like what's happening next? Like, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? I mean, is that sort of something that, like, is there this thing where you think, okay, like with the projects, do you now sort of like pick and choose and go, okay, this is actually what I want to do. This is what inspires me.
I think that nowadays the films that I've worked on and the projects that I've worked on, I want them to be deeper, more personal, more intimate, more real, more authentic. Like, I still love using surfing or cycling or sort of, I guess you could say, the athletic pursuit as a backdrop to a deeper, more forward-facing narrative. Like right now, I'm working on a film that's called I Am Here. Okay. And it's about an expedition we did crossing Iceland in the winter on fat bikes, like a really gnarly winter expedition. But it's set to the narrative of one of my teammates' bouts with addiction and overcoming addiction and being stuck in Mexico during COVID and not being able to go home. And it's a really raw, really real story that I think a lot of people are going to benefit from, because it kind of discusses this like sort of, a lot of Olympians kind of relate to this like post-Olympic letdown, this depression that comes after you achieve something great. And a lot of people can relate to that too. And so what I love to do is I love to juxtapose the idea of, here's something that's kind of superhuman. You know, we went and we did this amazing expedition. I think 1% of people will relate to that, but then everyone can relate to being lonely and feeling, you know, addiction in some way and, you know, wanting to be with your family and just, you know, that depression, that's real. So I right now, that's a film I'm working on. We're actually kind of like in the middle of trying to sell it and trying to finish it and et cetera, et cetera. It's a big project, but amidst that, I'm also doing a bunch of other partnerships. I've got a partnership right now with Nissan and Capital One and some other jobs we're doing. So, I mean, life is crazy as always, but I love the chaos. You know, it's just about, you know, you got to find that rhythm throughout it so you don't dedicate too much time to one thing.
Yeah. And with sort of environmental issues and having this massive following that you do online, I don't want to say that word influencer, kind of makes me cringe, but you know, like with people getting in contact with you the whole time saying, you know, like, why don't you should be doing this cause or that, or whatever opinion they have. Yeah. I mean, how do you kind of like, I guess not pick and choose, but like, do you sort of go with things that you relate to? I
do pick and choose. I mean, the first thing I'll tell people when they say, oh, you should care about this, you should care about that. I'm like, I don't have the luxury of caring about everything. In fact, nobody does. Human beings were never meant to input this much information ever. Just because the Amazon's burning down and Australia's burning down, you know, hundreds of years ago, we would have no idea. Yeah. It's only because of travel, only because of airplanes, only because of technology that we know. And just because we know, should we act upon every single thing? No, I mean, I don't think that that's the right answer. I think the right answer is to be deeply involved in something you care about, put your effort and energy there, and try to see through actual change, as opposed to just simply reacting to everything. We live in a very reactionary environment, so much so that people just feel like they need to react. And I've done that too. And I feel like I've noticed that it doesn't benefit. Like, it doesn't help. I poured a lot of my time and energy into protecting Iceland's glacial rivers and made a book about it. We've donated hundreds of thousands of dollars. I've spoken at government meetings and tried to actually change policy. That's where my heart is. In addition to that, I'm invested in a couple NGOs and nonprofits that get underprivileged and BIPOC youth out in the outdoors. Something that I see actual change happening. Yeah. Me, like, raising money, you know, for something or posting something on social media, it's like, that's just like the echo chamber. We're just yelling into the echo chamber. Like, I do feel terrible that places on earth are suffering, but does that mean that that's where all my efforts should go? Or if somebody reaches out and they're like, this is the most important thing in my world, you should care about it, that's not real. And I can empathize, doesn't mean I agree, you know?
So it's kind of then looking at creative projects like with the one that you got coming up with addiction, and you were like, okay, like this is something that people can relate to, you can relate to it, friends going through it, whatever it may be, then it's sort of then using that as a tool, right, to then spread.
Yeah, I mean, it's honestly, that's kind of, I see it as a separate thing. Like what the initiatives I try to advocate for environmentally and around the earth itself are very much usually different than the projects that I'm trying to, like a film or something like that I'm trying to work on. I see them as in tandem, but they're different initiatives, right? One is more about like socioeconomic issues and personal issues, and one is more environmental. So it's hard, there's like me as a creative, and then there's sort of me as like an ambassador of the planet, I guess you could say, or of human beings in general. And I think that, anybody who's in some capacity in the limelight, I guess you could say, you have to, speak up for the places you love, and that's important.
Yeah, nice. And where, apart from obviously Iceland, I mean, where else would you say, like is somewhere that you've truly connected with, or somewhere that you want to kind of go to?
I mean, I've been really lucky, fortunate to travel to a lot of the places that I've dreamt of traveling to a lot of the locations on Earth that like have kept me up at night. I've been to a lot of them. For me, I love the idea of going back to places. It's almost more meaningful to me than going somewhere new, because going somewhere new, it's kind of like a drug. You have all this excitement, you go there, you see it, it's really stunning. But when you go back somewhere, you're kind of in some way, you're sharing a deeper story, a deeper narrative. You're reconnecting with a place, and you can kind of entrench yourself a little deeper. The Aleutian Islands, the Kuril's, Alaska, the Faroes, Norway, those are places that really speak to me. The cultures, there's a element of real connection to the landscape that they have. And to be honest, they're the environments that just get me the most excited when I think about them.
And would you say it's the cold, or like because that's sort of something that's so different to where you grew up?
I don't even think it's the cold. They do all have a sort of harsher element in common, but they're not always cold. I mean, Iceland in the summer is not really cold. It's like it's really nice actually. What it is, it's the ever changing environment that is harsh and more hostile that I think shapes people into more hardy people. And I think that those cultures to me they're fascinating. I love them. I love seeing how they live, seeing how they survive, seeing how it shaped their stories, their policy, their government, the way they build their homes. Like, to me, that's the drama of it all. Like when I look for an image or a place I want to go shoot, I like to have a place where there's a lot of vertical relief, meaning like the mountains are going to meet the ocean, right? And it's just going to feel dramatic. I want drama in my images, and that's kind of what makes something exciting to me.
And like now, sort of looking into next year, sort of coming up to the end of the year, like how far out do you sort of, I guess, plan these kind of expeditions? Are you sort of, you kind of,
I think it all depends. Like if it's something that I'm really excited about, and I know that it requires a lot of planning, I'll plan a year out, sometimes 2 years out. Yeah. If it's something where I'm like, well, this, I don't really know if this is going to happen, I can't really dedicate tons of time. It's kind of like I'll leave a time slot open. But to be honest, a lot of the work that we do, like I don't know what I'm doing next year. I don't have any plans. I've got some loose ideas in my head as to like what might occupy our time, but I'm not like setting dates right now. Like the only thing I have planned is something in January, and that's pretty much it. But I also like leaving room for new things to happen. I want to leave space for opportunities to come up, and that's important.
Yeah. Nice, man. If people want to follow what you're up to, what's the best way?
I mean, people can just Google my name. It'll pop up. It's out there. I try to be pretty active on social media and share stories about what I'm doing. And I would say, if people want to connect, my website's a great place to connect with us and email us and whatnot. And I'm always excited to, share and connect and see people. I mean, I have a gallery in Pismo Beach as well. Mm-hmm. It's open every day. So people can always swing by and say what's up. And
And you guys do film nights and stuff like that, don't you?
Yeah, we do. We do film screenings. We've shown some film festivals. We've done a lot of stuff for the community. It's a big part of what I love and enjoy doing. So I mean, if people are ever interested, we have a newsletter and we kind of announce what we're doing and what's coming up. And I mean, I think that's a big part of what makes storytelling fun, is like actually connecting with people, you know, getting them out and in an event scenario where you can, you know, share a real meaningful experience.
Nice. Cool. Yeah. Well, Chris, thanks so much for your time, man. It's been awesome chatting.
I appreciate it, and great questions. It's always fun to kind of dive back into some of the more meaningful topics, you know, so I appreciate your time a lot.
Thanks, man.